The first thing I need you to remember today is, just like Moses, the defaults of your past does not disqualify the destiny that God has for you. Have you ever been placed in a situation where you did not know what was going to happen? Or have you ever asked God for something, but you just didn't know how things were going to work out? Maybe you may be going through a season in your life where you think that the future is uncertain. Well, you are not alone. In the Bible, we are told of a man who was given a major assignment and task from God to lead a multitude of people. At some points along his journey, you might even say that he was being assessed by God. However, it was not a formal assessment in an examination room for a couple of hours. Rather, it was an assessment of his character. Along his journey, there were many times when he just wasn't sure how things was going to work out. Now, at one moment, he wasn't sure how God could have used him and his voice. And at another instance, he encountered an obstacle which could have potentially led to his death and the death of those who were following under his leadership. The person I'm referring to is none other than Moses. Who was Moses, you may ask? Moses was a man appointed by God to lead the Israelite people out of slavery in Egypt. From an early age, without his own recognition, God was directing and orchestrating the pathway of his life, even in the most unusual ways. As a young child, due to the evil laws at the time, he was placed in a basket by his mother and was laid in a river to ensure the safety of his life. Despite this, God was with him. The Bible tells us in Exodus chapter 2 that whilst he was in the basket floating along the river, he was found by the daughter of Pharaoh, who was the ruler at the time. It turns out that the place where Moses was found was going to be the same place where God was going to fulfill his great purpose through Moses' life. Despite all of this, Moses still faced many other challenges in his early years. Exodus chapter 2 tells us that when he was grown, he murdered a fellow Egyptian. In this scene of Moses' life, we see the flaws of his character. In this encounter, not only could we have identified him as a murderer, but he also lacked integrity. Nonetheless, God was with him. You may be asking yourself, well, is this the same Moses that God had a major purpose for? Well, the answer to this question is a yes. We in our thinking may very well say that the character flaws of Moses should have disqualified the purpose that was on his life. However, it didn't. Despite his rough and challenging start, Moses was a man who was called by God to do a great work. He was this chapter 2. He gave a very critical piece of information that we must not overlook. He said, "And Moses feared and said, 'Surely this thing is known.' But when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well." Here we see that because of what Moses had done, he was filled with fear, and thus he fled from that land to reside somewhere different. It is vitally important that we recognize that because of fear, Moses was actually fleeing from the very place where God was going to use him. Oftentimes in our lives, fear can cause us to run away from the journey which God may be trying to take us on. Fear may be causing us to run from the very place that God intends to use us greatest. But today I can assure you that we have no reason